Java.
What do you have there, Java?
Oh, I was just getting my jars together for my full-stack web development framework. Got some Java Bean, Spring, Tapestry, Hibernate.
Wow, pretty thorough.
Well, yeah, just gotta get all that together, edit a few hundred lines of XML configuration, and compile it all. Then I'll be ready to go.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff.
Well, I would like to brag, but I am an enterprise-class web development framework. Don't you have to do all that stuff?
Actually, Ruby on Rails is a full-stack web framework out of the box, so I can just jump right into creating websites.
You mean no jars?
No jars. What is this?
Nothing. It's not anything. It's mine. It's a standard jar. It's nothing.
So probably the majority of you have seen that before, but I put it in my talk because I actually gave this talk this morning at the XML 2007 conference this morning. So some of this stuff might seem a little basic for some of you, but I hope we put some pieces together for the as far as REST services go. And I do get into more advanced topics as we go along. But I do need a show of hands. How many of you guys have created a RESTful Rails application? Okay. Cool. For this talk, I'm going to be identifying the big problem with web services. There's a problem with how it's developed. It's not really far enough along. This solution might be solved through REST, so we're going to take a look at what REST is. What is it really? Why is it only now that people are looking at it as a solution? How is Rails RESTful? We'll take a look at that. And then I'm going to give a gratuitous code demo. Hopefully for those of you who are already doing RESTful stuff, I'm going to be showing some Rails 2.0 stuff as well, so hopefully that'll be new for some of you. And then I'm going to take a look and kind of what I think the future of REST is and where it's going. So first, to start out, we need to take a look at the problem. And we have to take a look at human-to-computer interaction. And typically when we talk about human-to-computer interaction, we're talking about somebody interfacing with the browser to the web server, and they're probably using the HTTP protocol and HTML and CSS and JavaScript standards, so no matter what browser they're using, and no matter what server platform they're communicating with, they get the same experience, they get the same view of the data. On the other hand, with computer-to-computer interaction, it's not so straightforward. So let's take the example of a web server, which all you guys in here are familiar with. If I want to communicate with 3 other servers, let's say I've got a geocoding server, which I might send an address to and get back a lat long. I might have a payment gateway to do my credit card transactions. I might also have a shipping API that I interface with, so I can get shipping cost calculations. Maybe in the Web 2.0 world, I also interface with, say, MySpace or LinkedIn to get some data. Not that you can, really, but assume that I can here. The problem with all these different web services, well, it's twofold. The first is that I have to learn a new interface for each of these applications, right? Because they're all going to have different functions I need to call. And the second is that they all probably use different transport methods. They might use SOAP, they might use XML-RPC, they might use REST. So I've got kind of 2 barriers here that's preventing me from creating simple computer-to-computer communication. It's not really standardized enough. It really is not. Unlike the human interface, which is pretty standardized, this just isn't. So let's take a look at REST, and maybe we'll find a solution to this problem. REST, in case you're not familiar with it, well, you guys are mostly familiar with it, stands for Representational State Transfer. It comes from this dissertation published by Roy Fielding in 2000 in the dissertation entitled Architectural Styles and the Design of Network-Based Software Architecture. And he defines REST as a style of software architecture for distributed hypermedia systems. Now, if any of you have tried to read dissertation by a computer science PhD, you can find sometimes they're a little bit daunting. Sometimes they're a little bit hard to understand. So I'm going to try to simplify that by simply asking, what makes up a RESTful software architecture? Okay, there's 4 simple principles that make up a RESTful software architecture. First of all, it's got resources. If we're looking at this from a web application standpoint, one of my resources might be a user. Maybe that maps to a user table. All resources are addressable, meaning they have a unique address, maybe each address for new address for each user. They each have standard methods of interaction. You might also call these verbs. So if I want to get a get would be my verb. Lastly, RESTful software architectures have a protocol which is client-server. It's stateless, which means between requests, it doesn't remember anything between each request. And because it's stateless, that also makes it very easy to cache. So if I've got 2 requests that have, they request the same data, the first time I can cache it, the second time I can send back the cache data. And they're also layered, meaning they can go through many intermediary servers or gateways and still retain the same data back and forth between the client and server. The best example of a RESTful software architecture is, of course, the World Wide Web with the HTTP protocol. The HTTP protocol uses resources which are addressable through a URI, which means Uniform Resource Identifier. It has 4 methods: post, get, put, and delete. It's browser server rather than client server, same thing. It's also stateless. And it can be layered, it can go through many different gateways, and the request can go through many different computers to get to the server and back to your client. Many people believe that the reason why the web is so successful is because it's RESTful, and it follows the principles that I outlined in the previous slide. So, you might say, okay, this is all great, but what does REST really have to do with web services? And that's a good question, because if you look at these 4 principles, it's not immediately intuitive how or why you'd want to implement a web service using these principles. It's just not intuitive. And as I was creating this presentation, I started to think to myself, why is it only now that people are creating REST web services? Why is it just now? And so to answer this question, you kind of have to take a look at computer-to-computer communication, which has been going on, people have been doing this and solving this problem for over 30 years now. And so, I was putting together this presentation, and I saw I had these 2 futuristic-looking computers up there, and I got to figure out a better model that kind of fits the era. So I came up with this. I hope some of you guys get the reference. This is War Games. It kills me to think that it was made 25 years ago. But we'll use this as our example. Now, as software developers writing code, no matter what language we're programming in, our code contains many functions, right? We've got some Ruby. And if I'm Matthew Broderick, and I want to play global thermonuclear war, what do I want to do? I basically want to go to the server and call that function global thermonuclear war. I want to invoke that function. Another way of saying that is I want to invoke a remote procedure call, right? Which is, what people call these, calling these functions. Now, throughout the years, we've figured out easier ways to do this. We use XML, so it doesn't matter, what platform each computer is running on. We then came up with XML RPC, which kind of standardized this procedure call in a certain XML format. We came up with SOAP, which basically adds another transport layer to the XML RPC call. So what does this have to do with REST? Well, REST, as I showed before, at least the HTTP version of it, has 4 methods. You get 4. That's all you get. Okay. Now, when you compare this to the methods you might have in RPC, these methods are so different that it kind of makes sense that people would never really consider using the REST protocol for a complex web service. You know, it's not immediately intuitive why you want to do that. So then you might say, well, how is it that, you know, big services like Yahoo and Google and Flickr and YouTube are using RESTful web services? You've got these really complex applications, and they're using REST services, but they only have 4 methods. I know this is probably more obvious to the Rails crowd here than it probably was this morning to the XML crowd. So to answer this question about, you know, how you bring your application to RESTful nature, well, you just have to ask the question, well, how did Rails become RESTful? And this morning I obviously had to go through this and describe the MVC process. Is there anybody that needs me to go through what MVC is in this room? Probably not. But you know, separating your database tables, your view, display logic, and user action logic. That's probably pretty obvious to just about everybody in this room, unless there's people that just do Ruby in this room, which is cool. Just do Ruby without Rails. So let's take a look at a Rails controller. Really obvious. You know, this is what Rails controller, you know, might typically look like. At least a year ago, they all looked like this, where you've got different methods in there that you know, are called by, you know, looking at the URLs. So I have the Whopper controller and global thermonuclear war function, and they run just like that, right? Now, of course, as Rails kind of matured over the past year or two, there's 2 best practices that they started to realize, of course. The first is to keep your controllers as small or as skinny as possible. Right? The more code you can get out of your controllers and into your model, or even into presenters, or maybe even conductors, the cleaner your code's going to be. The easier it's going to be to test your code. The more maintainable it's going to be. You know, I know when I code these days, it's like every line of code I put in my controller, I second guess. Like, okay, is there any way I can abstract this out of my controller? Because I know it's going to be better in the long run if I can take it out. The second Rails best practice is that we realize you should really only use a single controller for every model. So if I've got a user table, I might have a user model, and I should have a user controller for that model. So following that criteria, my user controller ends up looking something like this. Do I need to turn off like the light so this is a little more visible? Yeah. Oh,
Thermonuclear war.
yeah. Oh. Shades. Oh no. Hey, that's nice. Just don't fall asleep. So, you know, this is the user controller, where I've got show, create, update, and destroy. And that's pretty obvious to probably most of you guys in this room. So let's list out those methods in action. So I've got my methods here. I've got get, post, and I can show user number 3, create a user, update a user, destroy a user. Now, some of you might be familiar when I show you this. This kind of looks familiar if you've listened to or watched one of David Heinemeier Hansen's keynotes. So here are your actions. We've got show, create, update, and destroy. If you think about it from the database level, these map really well, just like create, update, and delete. Now, if you remember those RESTful methods from a second ago, they map really well to these guys. Right? So when I'm showing, I can do a REST. When I'm creating, I'm doing a post. When I'm updating, I can do put, and destroy, I can delete. I can use REST how it was meant to be used. So if I look back at my methods and actions, I can realize here what I'm talking about are verbs and nouns, right? But I'm not really using REST properly here. So instead of the bottom 2 being post, what they should really be are put and delete. some people might consider this restful, but it's not restful yet. It's not using rest properly yet. And that's because I've got some duplication in my nouns. There's some verbs that are hiding in my nouns that don't belong there. Right? So what I need to do is I need to get rid of those verbs because it's duplication. Get is the same thing as show. Post is the same thing as create. Put is the same as update. Delete is the same as destroy. I don't need those anymore. So what I end up with is something that looks like this. Right? You can simplify it. I guess I should ask, how many people in this room solidly, like, understood this before I just mentioned it, like totally understood it? Oh God, I'm sorry. I hope it makes it a little more clear where it came from at least. So instead of things looking like this, they look a little bit more like this. So we just simplified the URL. You guys already know, so I'm going to shut up. So let's take a look at some code. Hopefully I'll show you something you haven't seen before. Okay, let's jump into it. So I've got a little application here, a little RESTful app. Got nothing in it yet. I'm going to go ahead and create some scaffolding. Now I'm running, Now I've already installed the latest version of Rails. I think this is running Rails 2 RC1. And with Rails 2 RC1, the scaffold is now generating RESTful controllers. We've kind of lost that old scaffold that lets you create non-RESTful controllers. And so I'm going to create a post model and send the title. I'm going to send in the body. I'm going to do like a published at the date time. And then let's go ahead and run the migration. Oh, let's take a look at that migration because it's now a sexy migration, right? So it's using this new thing from Rails 2.0, whereas you can see now we've kind of lost the old style where you used to have like, I think it was like column here. So instead of using column, now we've got t.string_title, t.textBody, .datetime, and by default it includes an extra timestamps, which gives you your created at, when it's created at, and updated at, or is it created on? Is it at or on?
Either one.
It's at by default. So it's created that for me. And of course, you guys are probably all familiar with these friendly XML scaffolds, so I won't even go into that. So let's load up this. Let's start the server. Cool. Then we should call this up. Oops, go to posts. All right, let's go to the post. So, you know, you've got all the rest of the cool stuff going on with your XML stuff that's already get built in, which you guys already know about, but, you know, so it doesn't look too impressive to you. One thing you might not know about, which is pretty cool, which impressed the guys this morning, is how easy it is to add, say, format.json, render JSON posts. Let's see if that, I wonder if that works without even me specifying to JSON. I wonder if I have to specify. Let's give it a try without it. Wouldn't that actually work? hey, it's pretty neat. So if you didn't know about that, that comes all with the Rails 2 now. We can put in all with JSON stuff. A lot of people have been talking about how easy it is to add additional formats. So like one thing that I've seen kind of floating around the net is somebody created something so you can do format dot iPhone and render like an iPhone format. Do some cool stuff like that. And you know, as you're probably familiar with, if you haven't taken a look, I want to show you guys too. One thing I kind of glossed over this morning, I actually glossed over here, because we Rails folk kind of ignore it, is the fact that browsers don't natively support put and delete, right? And it was cool because this morning when I did this presentation, I kind of looked around the room and I said, how many people just kind of realized that I kind of totally glossed it over and pretended that that totally wasn't the case? And a couple people were like, yeah, had confused looks. They were like, yeah, how is it really doing put? And if you haven't taken a look at how it does it, it's really interesting. So if I go to edit and look, how is it doing the put? Because it doesn't have put. If you look at, let me start a little Omni battle so I can focus you with the right stuff. So if you look at the end of this form, so here's my form. And here at the end, I've got a hidden field called underscore method, which is sending in the put. And my Rails server does all of the right kind of masking for me so that it knows which function to call. And if I look at the delete, what is it doing to fake the delete method? If I look here, what it's actually doing here is it's creating a form. It's creating a form. It has a link, but it creates a form automatically there. It creates a input element. There's where it creates the input element. The type is hidden. The name is method, and the value is delete. So it creates a form really quick for you, which is cool, unless you run into the problem I just ran into this last week, where I wanted to create I basically picture a shopping cart checkout form, right? Where you've got a list of things in your cart, right? And so I had these like little delete from cart things on the right side, and then I wanted to make the quantity field an input box where you can update. I would change this 2 of this item, 3 of this item, 4 of this item, update, right? Well, the problem with this implementation is that in order to, have a single form action that updates all of the items in my cart, I've got to wrap it all in a form. Well, I've got these delete links on the side here that each create their own little form. So it doesn't work so good for that if you've got to have a form around delete links at all. Kind of ran into that problem. If you have a solution to that problem, see me afterwards or shout it out. Okay.
But do you know how Rails responds to if you do actually an HTTP method put or delete? I mean, does it actually, if we were talking earlier how I'm trying to use Java to consume Rails services. I'm just wondering if it will work correctly.
Yes. Is it, well, I mean, the only client that can't handle the put and destroy is the browser, right? So for instance, I've got some Java code. I show these guys some Java code so they can know that Java works well with Ruby. And I basically have a GET request, right? So I can run a GET request that targets the post method, right? Which is probably not a big deal for you guys. Let me bring that to this presentation. I can run Java simple GET, right? It's going to get the stuff. And I'll answer your question in a second just by this code. And then I also did some code that did a post request. And as you can see here, it does a post request, and it sends in this XML here, which says from Java, yes, as well as Java. So I can run that simple post, right? And it went ahead and submitted the Java request to my Ruby web service. It's Ruby plays well with Java. Now, if I want to do a put request, I can take a look and say, oh, look, it created an object with the ID 3, I can go back into here and say, let's create this updated, and I change it so that I'm calling the right URL, and now I can change my request method to put. And basically, when you're looking at this programmatically, it's always going to accept put and delete and handle it the right way. So I can change that to put, and I can run that. Oh wait, it's Java, I have to compile it. Okay, so I can compile that, and then run that. And sure enough, it does the put the right way. And you can see up here that it called, the proper update method, and it updated the model of the database. Cool. I've got a few more slides I'm going to jump through.
Can I ask a question? So
Yeah.
you're just showing that if you don't use the underscore method hack, but the HTTP request does have the proper verb, Rails will still route it properly.
Oh yes. And a good thing to note, if you're dealing with JavaScript or any sort of AJAX stuff, that stuff will work with your methods. You can with what is it, the XML request stuff. Basically, you can set the method to put and delete. Like I said, it's only the browser that we need to do this hack for. But yeah, so any other thing Rails handles it without a hack, so you can send in put and delete as the proper method. So that's fine. So, just a few more slides, and then I'm going to draw a conclusion. As I said before, yeah, browsers can't do put and delete, but us as Rails developers, how much code are we going to really have to change when they do? Because they're going to eventually implement REST properly, hopefully. When they do, how much code are we going to have to change? Nothing, right? Because if you looked at the code that creates our forms, we don't even, especially with Rails 2.0, with Simply Helpful. Have you seen some of the cool stuff you can do with Simply Helpful? And let me show you some of the stuff real quick. Like if I look in my views, posts, edit, right? Here's my form. All I do is form form, right? I'm not telling it the method. It knows because post, already exists in the database. It has an ID that I'm doing a put method. If I look at my new, it's the same thing. It sees that post is a new model, so it knows I'm doing a post method. There's also some really cool stuff with like indexing here, where you can see I do link to post. It's like I'm not even doing the paths anymore. I no longer have to do like, post path, post path post, because I'm setting in the post model. But I no longer have to do that with Simply Helpful. It gives me cool stuff. Just to simplify stuff in Rails. So yeah, but we're not going to have to change any code when that gets implemented because Rails is going to pick that up by default. You can do some pretty cool RESTful nested resources, which is pretty awesome. And the rest of this is another one of those things kind of people take for granted. Us Rails guys, we know the benefits of this. We've seen the benefits of this, and the rest of the world I'm hearing is still kind of catching up with the benefits of doing these really verbose, intuitive, I don't know if I would call it verbose, but really intuitive, readable URLs. You can do some pretty cool stuff like this. And, Google loves this. Search optimization loves this sort of stuff. If you've got a website that has, books, and you've got /books/ agile development with Ruby on Rails, Google's going to love you. You get higher page rank by doing that sort of stuff, which is great. I mean, if you're not really taking advantage of that, I've been using a lot lately Permalink, or Permalink Foo. It's like a plugin or gem or something, and it allows you to create really understandable, instead of using the ID, right, I would use part of the name that creates these slugs or permalink. So, if the user instead of 3 might be Gregg - Pollack, for instance.
Oh, it's still used ID.
What's that?
It's still used ID dash username.
Right, username basically. Yeah, user ID. Or, yeah, ID / that's a good point. REST forces you to create better code. We kind of know that. If you're forced to keep stuff out of the database, out of your controller, you're going to create better code. You guys know that. So let's take a look at the future of REST. Now I'm going to make some specification. I think in the future we're going to see an increasing number of RESTful software architectures get developed because there's a lot of benefits you can get out of that. Some examples of additional RESTful software architectures are resource-oriented architecture. And it comes out of this RESTful Web Services book. And Rails really follows this resource-oriented architecture really well. The REST principles that I laid out, they're just principles. They're really not enough to consider a full software architecture. And this book kind of details that and lays out what's sort of missing from what Roy Fielding wrote in his dissertation. The forward of this book is actually written by David Heinemeier Hansen because he's a big believer in this stuff. So if you're really into REST and you're doing Rails and REST, I really recommend you pick this up because it'll kind of explain even more in depth than I am today why we use REST and why it's good and how you should develop in a RESTful nature. Also, some people don't know this, but OpenSocial is a RESTful software architecture. There's two parts to OpenSocial though. There's a JavaScript part and there's a data part, the database part that's on the back end. That's is RESTful services part. And you know, Google gets it. If you look at Google and how they implemented this, it looks a lot like we do, a lot like we implement it in the Rails world. So what's the big picture here? The big picture is that if we can standardize the way computers talk to computers, it opens the door for additional innovation. And I'm always looking for new ideas, ways to get those new ideas, stuff that people haven't thought about. And us Rails guys, we're always kind of on the cutting edge. The first step, I believe, in kind of standardizing computer-to-computer communication is to get the protocols the same. Get more people sticking with REST. So I'm basically kind of dissing, the WS stack and SOAP. I really think that REST is the way to go. It has a proven track record. That's the reason why the web became so successful. We know how to deploy those sort of apps and cache them. So it makes sense that if we take REST, use it properly, that we can do good things with it and more people can use it. Now, that doesn't solve the second problem. The second problem that I initially lined out, which is that each of these applications has a different interface. So what the solution for that is to create other RESTful software architectures like OpenSocial, which defines the interfaces into these applications, right? So if I'm programming an application and I want to interface with the social, with the social graph or whatever they call it, and I create the Rails or Ruby code to interface with one OpenSocial application. Using that same code, I can now interface with 10, 20, 100, 1,000, however many applications that have implemented the software architecture. I can interface with all of them with the same code. And that's extremely powerful. I'm sure you guys can see that. And that's the end of my talk, really. I'm Gregg Pollack. This is my blog. You guys, railsenvy.com is my blog. Although lately, most of the stuff on there is just the podcast. I've been doing the Rails Envy podcast, which is a podcast on Ruby and Rails news. If you'd like to read more about RESTful web services, I really recommend this book. I probably don't need to say anything about this book to the people in this room. And that's it. That's about it. Is there any questions?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Again, web services also serve another purpose. SOAP-based reports also serve another purpose.
Right.
Where your transfer protocol happens to be asynchronous, like JMS. Right. I understand it's not SOAP or doing anything that's like JMS is giving you asynchronous. Over here, we are restricting ourselves to a pure synchronous protocol like HTTP. For a long-running process, where you submit a request, even if the process communicating with computers, you send in a SOAP request, the project does some job and then gets back to you. Right? When you build an enterprise application, most of the tasks are at least asynchronous, not really synchronous as you have in a real world application, which is HTTPs. Building REST for example, I know SOAP is not very easy, but then you still have some way of putting in all your junk in an XML sending it to another session process.
Does anybody want to take that question? I'm not entirely sure what the answer to that is. Do you want to?
It was kind of hard for you to hear, but you were saying about the synchronous problem with REST and using that as back-end processing and such. There's nothing stopping you from spawning off another thread to do the RESTful communication and therefore making it asynchronous. Would that not solve the problem?
I mean, the fact that you're using your protocol as HTTP, which is asynchronous in nature, which means you make a request, you're waiting for the response. Whereas if you go for a transport like JMS, where you send a message and then you're not waiting for that anymore. The response comes back later and you have some way of getting back the response. I'm not saying there's a problem with the inherent nature of the protocol itself, and the fact that REST is so tightly coupled with HTTP as such, probably makes web service a better solution when you have a requirement where asynchronicity is probably a requirement.
Well, see, I still don't think that's true. I think the reason that REST is so liked right now is partially because it's built upon HTTP, which has had it's such a known problem. I mean, there's so many ways to make it work faster, and there's so many ways of dealing with like connection pools and such. The only issue that you brought up with the threading idea is that you are maintaining consistent connection, right? But there are web servers that have been worked on for the past 20, 30 years that work very well with maintaining those connections and getting them gone as fast as possible without using too many resources. So I don't know if I would really argue that REST essentially can't scale because of that.
I've got a more direct response to that. I mean, in terms of how you do something like that, how you do say a queuing system restfully. Well, you've got a synchronous request which creates a queue entry, and the response is queue entry created, and then it goes away. Subsequently, subsequently, you could, the originator could inquire about the queue entry, part of the thing of the queue entry might be the identifier of a resource to be posted back to when whatever process is complete. So each particular interaction is synchronous, but you've got but they're each individually very quick. There's nothing, and so that's a way of designing a system with RESTful components where you don't have where no one's ever hanging on the line for 45 minutes waiting for the other for the counterparty to finish.
Wouldn't I mean, as far as like comparing JMS to REST, I mean, wouldn't it be a more closer analogy is JMS to active messaging or something like that? And so, I mean, if you do want to do asynchronous, messaging, you'd use something like JMS, or you use something like active messaging. But you're saying, but what SOAP does is it's a layer on top of JMS that basically gives you the asynchronous semantics, right?
Yeah, so the grammar of the message is defined by SOAP.
So that would be like sending HTTP headers over some messaging protocol. Would be the equivalent of what SOAP is doing, right?
Right.
Because you're sending SOAP over HTTP, you're sending SOAP over JMS, and you're saying, oh, that's the same thing, I have the same interface. So if we wanted to copy that, we could send HTTP headers and downs through our messaging interface and respond with HTML or XML or whatever. But I think in most cases that isn't a straightforward solution. And so you would design a messaging system, and if you wanted it to be a RESTful messaging system, you would set up whatever message protocol you use, whatever message description, so that the message type sort of describes what the verb is, and that the XML or whatever you're sending follow these principles. But I mean, it's entirely different than what he's been talking about with HTTP REST.
And I think that I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but your point was incredibly good. That, you don't have to persist the connection throughout a long-running process. You can submit. The resource can be something that's not something you normally think is a resource. It could be a job, right? So you're submitting a job for processing, and then you get the job ID, and you check on that job to see if it's finished processing, or it posts back to your RESTful service to tell you that the job is finished processing. So that's another way of making it asynchronous.
there any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, that's
All of this is assuming that you really need asynchrony, because, you know, if you could live without it, it's so much asynchrony. But sometimes you can.
Have you looked into like Make RESTful or any of those helpers that really? I mean, because I think a lot of people have been thinking it, but since the RESTful controllers look almost identical.
It's a good question. I actually submitted a RailsConf talk that's going to look at all of them and try to draw some conclusions.
Okay, well, that's not what I'm going to submit.
So I'm hoping I can give that talk and really kind of give them the analysis that I can. I've seen sort of the best of both worlds. I did some work with PaperPost, which is a shop out of Orlando, and they're a total Rails shop, and they kind of rolled their own version of Make Resourceful, which is great. And then I'm now working with a team that is kind of frowning against that sort of, kind of taking that out. So I've kind of seen both sides of the spectrum. On the one hand, it's cool because it allows you to make an abstraction that, and not duplicate code. On the other hand, I'm not too sure that abstraction is good in some circumstances. It's like you're hiding some of your code. It's making your code a little less understandable. Some people might argue. But anything that abstracts your code out, to something where then the next time I need to hire a Rails developer and hand them code, if there's going to be a learning curve, it's even more than the defaults of Rails. You kind of have to go, if I'm going to add an abstraction to my code, then it better stay with people that really know it. There's a chance that I'll have other people working on it. You definitely want to add those abstractions. You could say the same thing about wacky Canadians with like Hamel and what's the other one? What's that? SAS? Yeah, SAS, where it's like, it's really nifty for me to do it, but if I've got to hire a graphic developer to work on that code, well, they might kill me. Right? Anyways, so you guys have probably all seen the Rails videos. One thing we haven't released yet is the bloopers to those. You guys want to see that?
Sure. The rap at the end of, which one is it that has the rap at the end?
The Django?
That's really embarrassing. I loved it. If there's time, I have one other quick question.
Yeah.
So just like Rails has its own take on testing, like even what terms like unit testing mean, my introduction to REST as a software architecture was through Rails, but I know as I've read more about it, it has its own take. But I'm still learning about that. I'm wondering, since like looking at other people's perspectives outside of Rails, how that compares.
Well, Rails is kind of paving the way. Great. I mean, you can tell that now that I read the RESTful book, that book that I put up there a second ago, you can kind of see that David read that book, right? Or was asked to read that book. And he pretty much implemented, took kind of his version of how he interpreted that book and implemented it in Rails. And what's cool about that is, Rails is now the standard, right? So now other of the languages, other frameworks, .NET, .java, I think some people might say they have no choice but to follow suit. Really. Because of how Rails implemented it. And I think you're going to see that with other frameworks now. That they're going to implement, not only are they going to implement REST, but they're probably going to implement just like Rails did, if they haven't already in certain forms.
Even Microsoft?
With RESTlet in Java, and it's a framework that's been around for a little bit, I think a couple of years, maybe 2.5 years. And they do have a little bit of a different take than Rails does on, REST services. And it's a little bit different, but if you wanted to see another way of coming at REST, look at like RESTlet or Java, there's a JSR 3.11.2 that is a REST, implementation. They're a little bit different. They've got some different ideas, about how to do routing, and they do in JSR 3.11. Basically, what they do is they put the roots. They have the roots as annotations in Java files right next to the methods themselves. So you can basically, put the URL like right next to the map. You know, so there's a little bit of it. It's a kind of paper, right? I
It's,
don't know if it's good, but.
it's cool at this XML conference, because it's like when you talk to like the smart people and they find out I do Rails, they all kind of know. They all kind of know that Rails is doing things that other languages, are typically, trying to, or catching up in different ways. So I mean, you guys are all in the right place at the right time. You got the right language. I think it's pretty clear. Yeah.
I don't know if this is actually a good question, but if somebody else has like an opinion on it, I'd love to hear it. Something that's bothered me about, and I'm the same way as you, by the way. I learned REST through Rails, and so I don't know what I'm kind of missing from other implementations. But there's no discovery in REST, and that's sort of something that's been bugging me.
And that's if you read in the book, the guy in the book, he actually has a suggestion on how to solve that. A different. Basically, you're missing the WSDL kind, right?
I don't know what a WSDL is.
Oh.
It's a waddle. They call it waddle.
A waddle?
WADL.
The WADL.
I'm missing like a sitemap. I don't know like that there is a user's URL. I don't know that there's nested URLs underneath users unless somebody tells me intrinsically about the application.
Right. And there's does anybody know that somebody in the Rails community is working on a solution towards that right now?
I just came across a bug the other day. There was a wish list for the future of REST on Rails, and it included options, which would solve that.
What are options?
Options is a header.
Oh yeah, the options thing. So it would send back like a sitemap in the options.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was pretty much it. Thanks.
Cool. Well, I guess we'll move onward.
Ruby on Rails. And we're starting over again. Hi, I'm Ruby on Rails. And I'm Kate PHP. Hi. What was that? Oh, and I'm Kate PHP. I didn't know you went. You do really just yeah. Oh, yeah. Sometimes I pee when I laugh. Okay. Hi, I'm Ruby on Rails. And I'm Java. What do you got there, Java? I've got all my jars from There's no way. Okay, alright. Got all my jars for my full class, enterprise class, business class. I have no clue what I'm selling, but I use all these jars to do it. But wait, there's more. Okay, hold on. Hi, I'm Ruby on Rails. Ruby on Rails killed my dad. You can give me a ride in her pink Corvette over to your offices in the land of make-believe. Sorry. Sorry, I didn't know that. Hi, I'm Ruby on Rails. Actually, you're a dick. Hi, I'm actually Ruby on Rails. And I'm PHP. Fine. And look, you press this button. Oh yeah, I'll propose that to my manager. Hi, I'm Ruby on Rails. Kinda itches. Kinda itches. Kinda itches. Kinda itches. Kinda itches. Does it itch? Kinda itches, yeah. Just a little? A little bit. A little bit? Kinda a little bit? Kinda itches just a little bit. Hi, I'm Ruby on Rails. And I'm PHP.
Are you actually like chunking them down?
Yes.
Oh, you're gonna be so wild.
I know.
Like 16 takes, you're taking the whole like path.
Hey. I'm sorry.
I think that was all.
I'm sorry. I did not mean I couldn't help it. Because the beach is so great and Rails is at the beach, but PHP isn't at the beach. It's just stuck here doing work.
Maybe by the time I finish this sarcastic monologue.
This is why I drink.
I can change databases. Just like that.
Just like that?
As you can see, it was just somebody's living room order going in. Hi, I'm Ruby on Rails. Okay.
And I was not ready. No?
Well, with Ruby on Rails,
Yep.
hi, I'm Ruby on Rails.
And I'm done. That's what I am.
Done. Describe. Hi, I'm Ruby on Rails.
And I forgot to pick up the change again.
Go for it. You know,
Because I sent in naked pictures of myself to get this iPod. And so far, I don't have the iPod. Just pictures of my everywhere now. Upgrades are pretty cool, but they're not cheap, you know?
well, Ruby on Rails is open source, which means it's completely free. So I say free too much.
That's pretty awesome. It's easy to deploy and develop with.
No. But occasionally there's this Danish guy back there. He waits for me to make mistakes. He waits for me to make mistakes and then goes. It's so true.
You ever get the feeling there's like a phone that rings?
Okay, you want to do like the zoom in? Well, as in dry. Do dry like you want. She gets back up.
I think we got pretty much every horrible dance move ever.
Nope.
What'd you miss?
The real end.
Hip hop. Forgot that. Oh, what's that?
Body roll.
Ferrari?
Yeah, I think so. Twitter can't scale. I'm sorry.
Who is your dad on eBay? eBay. Your dad's on eBay. Who is your dad on eBay?
App.com.
My dad's a guy.
Sorry.
Who is your dad anyway? Adobe or Mac? Who is your dad anyway? What's wrong?
There's a bug in my
No, it's horrible. Start over.
What?
What's wrong? No. There goes son.
I'm sorry.
Maybe a little more.
What's wrong?
There's a bug in my.
That was good. Were you laughing?
I know, because I can't believe I was able to produce that sound.